Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Klauser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Now I'm joined with one of my old players, Joe Engler. Joe, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to this conversation. We'll get into some of the details as to how we reconnected after 20 years. Um, but before we get started, just introduce yourself. Who is Joe today?
Joe today is I'm an associate dean in the School of Education at Gonzaga. So that's my official title. My educational background is as a school psychologist. So a psychologist who works in school districts with K-12 students primarily. But I think more importantly, Joe today is a father, a husband. I have two beautiful daughters, 11 and 8 years old, and a wonderful wife who's also an educator. So we spend our time in Spokane, Washington, and um, spend a lot of time in education.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So just to give the listeners a little bit of a background, I introduced you as one of my old players, but technically you never actually played a game for me. You played in our organization. You actually played a couple games against me. But you came in and were part of our collegiate team that played in the ACBL, the Atlantic Collegiate Baseball League, back in 2003. Which again is just hard to fathom that it's been that long. And you were just one of those players that came in and just brought a special presence. Like I immediately kind of clicked with you. Because obviously, even though you didn't play for me, we had interaction. I was the general manager of the organization, and got you guys set up with your housing, and helped with summer jobs and all that sort of stuff. And you're just one of those guys that really clicked. And you know, after you'd played for us, and you went back to Dakota, where you finished up your career there for Minot State University and ended up in their Hall of Fame. You didn't mention that in your own intro, so I'll be sure to give you that plug. Um, but you and a handful of those players were always guys that I would think of often. Just wondering, like, hey, I wonder how these guys are doing. And then once we sold our house and started traveling, I decided to do a Google search and found out you were in Spokane and knew that we were going to be heading through Spokane on our long route to eventually Alaska, but we're going through Spokane to get to Great Falls to meet our group that was traveling there. So I shot you an email and asked you if you remembered me, and would love to get together. And we were going through, and the stars aligned, and we were able to do that. But what was your first, when you saw that email pop into your inbox and opened it up, and kind of heard where I was and what I was doing at this point, like what was your initial reaction to that?
I, I was super excited. I think I'm one of these people who loves connections with people. And, through my, whether it's baseball or professional career, I've been able to meet a lot of really cool people across the country. And so any opportunity I have to connect up and share stories of where we're at and hear stories about where you're at, uh, immediately jumped at the opportunity to reconnect and see how things were going.
Yeah, I love it. And we had a great time, and we only were able to get together with dinner because we were kind of passing through, and you guys were gearing up for a whitewater rafting trip. But well, we got to meet what was your girlfriend when I first met her back in 2003. It was kind of funny as we were texting back and forth, setting up the details for dinner and everything. Um, I just kind of asked the question, like, hey, because you brought her to Pennsylvania for a week or two. I'm not sure exactly during the season. So I got to meet her there. And, I mean, honestly, it's probably, in most cases, that's probably a long shot that, 20 plus years later, you would, be married to that girlfriend at the time. And I just kind of asked the question, I was like, hey, is there any chance that, you're still with, and you're like, I absolutely am. She's now my wife. And it was just so cool. Because again, just a little bit of interaction I had with her, back in 2003 that, again, she was telling me about farming, and it's just kind of a neat thing, something that who thought that a you know little conversation over food at Smoky Bones, talking about farming would last on this guy and make such an impression. So it was really cool to, find out you guys were married and had two kids. No, when we met the entire family, man, it was just, such a blast. So I'm so grateful that we had that opportunity, and we now know that Spokane will be one of those spots as we're, traveling back and forth that we'll make sure we want to get to and spend some time with you guys again. So, so grateful for that. But um, let's talk about, a little bit of baseball, what initially connected us back in 2003. So, I don't remember. I think you were going into your junior year. You would be able to answer that for sure.
Yep, I was
Um,
going to my junior year.
yeah. So obviously still pretty young, and North Dakota to Pennsylvania isn't just a hop, skip, and a jump. So, what was it that gave you the desire to travel across the country to play summer baseball in you know Reading, Pennsylvania, and you were staying up in Kutztown, Pennsylvania,
Yep.
which is literally the middle of cornfields. Probably made your girlfriend at the time feel pretty much at home when she saw where you were staying. But what made you want to make that trek, and what did you learn from that trek?
So thinking back at that time, so going into my junior year, I was dating Calissa for, gosh, pretty much that entire academic year. Playing baseball, things were going pretty well. One of my coaches in Minot, he was coming out to coach for Lehigh Valley during that summer. And so that's kind of how the connection came. Loved playing baseball, so wanted to go out and keep playing, and had a pretty good sophomore year, and um, ended up making the trek out. He drove me out to Pennsylvania, and through that time, it was like when I think back about that time, that opportunity, and kind of the stars aligning and everything like that, it was kind of a period of time for me where I was growing up quite a bit. So going through like a maturation, a pretty serious girlfriend at the time, traveling across the country, growing up on the West Coast, had never been that far east before. So taking a leap of faith, having a pretty solid relationship, playing the sport that I love, and just seeing all of those things come together, and taking like I said, a leap of faith to come out to Pennsylvania and experience that and play baseball out there, and see what that was all like.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And that was actually the only year that we ended up having a team in the ACBL. So it really was a matter of, you know, stars aligning that, you happened to get there that first year, that only year, for that particular team. But, you get there and you're now thrown into this mesh of, guys from, all over the country. We had players from Texas and, Florida and New Mexico, and obviously a lot of Pennsylvania guys. Um, I'm sure it was a little bit like when you first arrived at college, again, taking that step from high school to college, but now you're taking this other step, in a situation that wasn't familiar to you, a new coaching staff, all new players. What's it like making that adjustment? Kind of getting out of that comfort zone with being guys who you're used to playing with, how they are. And now all of a sudden you've got really just I don't even know if it was a couple weeks to try to learn these guys before we started playing. I mean, in college summer baseball, for those who don't know, it's not like you go through this 6 week spring training period. Like it's show up, get your housing, and 5 6 days later, we're playing our first game. And if we're lucky, we might have had 3 or 4 practices prior to that. So what was that adjustment like for you?
It was relatively smooth. Like like I was able to draw back on some experiences. So when I was 16, I went and played on a Washington team in Knoxville, Tennessee. So during that time, I was put together with a bunch of people I didn't know. We went to Tennessee and played. And then when I was 17 going into 18, I ended up playing on a team that went and played in Cuba. So once again, it was people from all over the place and went and, had to learn each other really quickly, figure out how we were all going to mesh together and do that. So I had a couple of experiences similar from that. So, I mean, I think most importantly is becoming a good team and being a good teammate. So, right away it was more so about how do we hang out outside of the ball field. All of us were kind of displaced at the time, so we were each other's support network, if you will, social network, all of those things. And so, really just leaning in to learn about the guys and who they were and what made them click, I think really helps make that transition a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just in life to get yourself in circles like that where you're out of your comfort zone and you've got to make that adjustment. You have to learn, you know, how to meet and interact with new people is so important just in our growth as human beings in general. I mean, that's one of the things that, I've learned just in traveling. I mean, I'm actually very introverted by nature, but from traveling and meeting new people and talking to new people and doing book signings and that sort of stuff has certainly allowed me to to get out of my shell. So like what's your advice for those people who are reluctant to put themselves in those situations because they're so used to that comfort zone? And I mean, some people, it's easy to take that leap, and other people, it's a lot tougher. So, what's your advice for those who are struggling with, taking that leap and getting out of their comfort zone?
I think, like to me, everybody has a story. And I actually find the more you listen to or hear people's story, the more fascinating it is. You really get to see human beings in a different light because people are pretty cool as far as what they've done, what they've accomplished, the challenges and struggles that they've went through in their lives. So I think my advice is everybody has a story, and more often than not, I find the stories quite fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. And that really is the underlying theme of this podcast is that people ask me, well, you spent 30 years coaching baseball. Is it a podcast about baseball? And I'm like, no, yeah, I have former players on. I've got former professional athletes on, but I also have life coaches and I have other full-time RVers and I have, all this, just wide variety of individuals because I have that exact same belief is that everyone has a story, and I think they're all, fascinating as you dig into them and very inspirational as well. So, completely unrehearsed that you kind of went down that same road as well, but I love it. Um, one of the things that happened that season early on, something that never happened during my career and has never happened since, is we lost one of the members of our coaching staff. If I remember correctly, it was actually after our first home game, so it might have been our second or third game of the season overall. But I do recall it was after our first home game where our pitching coach suddenly passed away in his sleep. And man, for me, that was a tough time. Um, I had to make a phone call to his father to let his father know that his son had just passed away. And Brad was just one of those guys who, I think everybody was drawn to immediately. I mean, again, he wasn't the head coach, he was a pitching coach for us. Um, Coached at Tulane, um, played at Tulane. I forgot where he was actually coaching at the time, but just one of those guys that you're just drawn to. And like a lot of you guys who, were coming into Pennsylvania, I mean, he was on that same journey. He relocated for the summer and, was kind of part of that, you know, that contingent up there in Kutztown, you know, living and figuring out, what was this part of Pennsylvania all like. So tell me a little bit about how that affected you, when you first heard the news and then just kind of, pushing through it and playing the rest of the season after that had happened.
Yeah, it was really interesting too because I mean, I would say in a lot of ways growing up, I was fairly sheltered from the standpoint of like my family all lived on the same like in the same road and vicinity um and then when I went to North Dakota, um it was that so 9/11 happened pretty soon after. And so like I'm starting to expand and see different aspects of the world. And then it wasn't too long after that that in Minot there was a train derailment where anhydrous ammonia ended up like was all over the town and was quite scary at the time too. And so like as this developmental time, like get it growing up and realizing um life can be unpredictable and all of those things. And then when I came out and this happened too, and this was one of my first real experiences with death that kind of shakes you a little bit and you realize that the world's a lot bigger than what you once thought it was. I remember kind of just being really shaken by that. Because like I said, I still at that time had great grandparents and hadn't really dealt with death. But once again, kind of talking about what was unique or neat about teammates and coaches and all of those things is in tragic situations like that, people can really pull together.
Yeah.
And I think, even though it was a really unfortunate circumstance, I think it brought us as players closer together and kind of gave that perspective on how delicate life can be.
Yeah. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. And, again, I know some of the other um, teams in the league as they reached out because we had a series coming up the weekend after that happened, which we ended up postponing. Um, and a lot of the other teams, were like, man, I really don't even know how you guys, can move forward after something like that. And, the truth of the matter is, I mean, life does go on. So, you know, taking that, we had a little ceremony at our first home game after Brad had passed, tribute to him. And that was pretty emotional for everybody involved. But to get back on the field, um, and I guess try to, reestablish some sense of normalcy at that point. You know, that first time after he had passed of, you know, getting on the field, um, what were some of the emotions that you were dealing with going into that game?
I think it's one of those things where, going into it, you're feeling all the emotions and all those things. I think one of the things that I love about baseball is, after the first pitch or after the first ground ball to you, or after your first swing, it's you get back into this routine and rhythm of something that's comfortable. So, at that moment before we start is very uncomfortable and challenges us in all these different ways. And then there's the beauty of the game. And it's first pitch, like I said, first ground ball. It's you get back into a rhythm and routine of, oh, it feels good to be playing again.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. So what are some of the the greatest lessons that you learned, on the diamond that you continue to use today, in your professional career or family? I mean, it's amazing to me the lessons that baseball in particular. I mean, sports overall, but baseball in particular, the life lessons that it can teach us, um, really goes into every aspect of our life. Like I said, family life, professional life. What are some of those lessons that you're still, you know, using today and reflect back on and be like, wow, that is actually something I learned through the game many years ago.
Oh, there's so many lessons, but some of the things that stand out in particular is one is the importance of team and the importance of the collective is, although baseball has a lot of aspects of kind of the one-on-one, whether it's the pitcher versus the batter or whatever that is, just the importance of being a good teammate, being there for people, being there with people, and seeing what can happen when you put those things together, right? I'm often reminded when you look at professional baseball, is is not always the team that pays the most money wins the game in all sports, right? It's the team that clicks and gels together. And so I think it really taught me that's important. And to do that, you have to develop relationships with the people you're there with, and you got to get to know them really well. So I think in life, whether it's professional, whether it's personal life, is I always try to take the time to be there with people, and for people. So that's one of the lessons that I've learned from the game. Another thing that I love about baseball is I feel like it's a game where the people that can monitor themselves. So it's a game that has a lot of unwritten rules. It's a game that you gotta you gotta you're not going to go out there and do something stupid because you or one of your teammates can get hit by a 90-mile-an-hour fastball pretty quickly after that. So I think just the ability to monitor and maintain things as people and not needing as much oversight is a beautiful part of it that I enjoy in a lot of aspects of life. And then I think, when I was playing baseball, it was your cleats need to be cleaned all the time. You need to have clean clothes, like just really taking a lot of pride in whether it's the field condition, taking pride in making sure that you show up in a outstanding sort of way, are some things that I take away from the game as well.
Yeah, and I think you alluded to it a little bit talking about that first game with Brad, but that's one of the things that takes place over and over throughout a season. Now that was an extreme circumstances where we're getting over the death of someone that we cared about. Um, but throughout the season, like there's days where you may not have had the best day. Again, you guys weren't professionals, so you guys were working jobs. So you may have had a crappy day at work. You may have had an argument with your parents, your girlfriend before the game, but once you get to the field, like you've got to wipe that all clean and show up as your best self, regardless of what happened, the 8 hours prior to you stepping on the field. So, what, you know, when you were playing, what were some of the things that you would use to kind of wipe the slate clean once you got to the ballpark?
I think it was a lot of it was just the love and the passion for the game. And so I think it's, as I reflect on my playing days and all those things, when you're on the field, nothing else seemed to matter.
Yep.
And I don't know if that's a skill that we learn. I don't know if that's just the beauty of what baseball is. But yeah, it's in those moments, it was actually quite easy to not think about the rest of the world, um, because you had a game. And I mean, I say a game because it is a game, but it's more than just a game. Something that you love right in front of you, and are blessed to be able to do that. So for me, the wiping the slate clean was pretty easy, just because I loved being out there.
Yeah. Now, how do you deal with that today? Say you're not having a great day, but yet you got an important staff meeting, or you've got, meetings with students where again you want to be completely and 100% present at that point. So, again, it's that same thing. You got to go in there with a clean slate. So what do you do now today to wipe that slate clean and make sure that, you're fully present in those situations?
I think it's just that is every opportunity we have to interact with somebody, we can help make their day better, or we can create a negative memory of a situation. And a lot of times these negative memories are things that will last with people for long periods of time. And so I think it's taking every moment as an opportunity to try to make a positive impact with people in the world, what have you, because like I said, is every time you're with somebody, um, you can sour something if you don't show up, as your best self. So I try to always do that in the work that we do. I don't spend a lot of time with phones. I think as you saw with my kids, they don't have a lot of technology, all of those things. So we try to always meals, hanging out with each other, just being present um and doing that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Do you feel that's something that um, was inherent? Like, is that something your parents taught you, or like, how did you, you know, develop that to make sure that you're fully present and enjoying those moments?
I think there's elements, obviously, growing up when I did, we didn't have all the bells and whistles that are available now. So I think that's an element to it. I think when I met Calissa, my wife, growing up on the farm, um, she worked really, really hard, long, long days, long hours, doing those types of things. So there wasn't a lot of distractions, if you will. And then I think when I went into school psychology, um, one of the things is in that line of works, you're dealing sometimes with really difficult situations, scenarios, and and people have to be really vulnerable with you. And so I think, you owe it to them to be fully present at those times because you're walking through journeys with people as they go along their paths as well and going through, like I said, some pretty difficult times. So I think it's a combination of kind of how I grew up, the era of that, meeting my wife, the professional piece, and it's just always kind of come together as a value system that we espouse today.
Yeah. What made you go into that field when, at what point did you decide, okay, this is you know, where I want to go and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it kind of came together in a quite interesting way. I mean, so I was a first generation college student, so um, didn't know what college was like. I went to Minot with my brother, and so we were there, and so I was playing baseball, enjoying all of those things, and I was taking classes that I liked. I at that point in time, like now, you have to meet with your academic advisor all the time, and you set up a good path and all of those things. Back at that time, it was on your own and you need to figure it out. And I never had anybody who helped mentor me to help figure what those things out. So I was just taking classes, and ironically enough, I really enjoyed all the psychology classes. So ended up, I think I met with my advisor like my junior year, um, and was like, "Hey, we need to come up with a plan so I can get out of here." And my advisor at the time was like, okay, let's look at all the classes that you'd taken. And it just so happened, like all luck, that I was pretty close to a degree in psychology. I had a minor already in philosophy and was pretty close to a concentration in sociology. So took class I want, it all worked out really nice. And then I remember me with my advisor, and he was like, "Okay, what are you going to do after you graduate?" And I was like, I don't know, like work." And he's like, "Well, if you get a degree in psychology, you really know to graduate school." And I'm like, "What's graduate school?" So had no idea about that. My junior year is when my wife and I got married in undergrad. And so my advisor knew her and knew she was going to be a teacher. And he was like, "Well, have you ever thought about school psychology?" I'm like, "No, I don't know what that is." And so he's like, "Oh, you might want to think about it and all these things." So I started looking it up, and we had a program at Minot in school psychology. And so I applied and ended up getting in, and then ended up going on for my PhD at the University of South Dakota. So it really originated from taking classes that I wanted, not know having any clue what I wanted to do or what that looked like. And then just through the exploration and, ended up, fortunately, everything working out really, really well.
I love that. So did you go into your freshman year undecided?
Oh, yeah.
And
So I
and
went
and
in
your
and
sophomore year, it sounds like?
oh, yeah. So
Okay.
and I mean, I'd rely on my wife because she knew girlfriend at the time because she was more familiar with how, the system worked. But for me, it was playing baseball, and obviously we had to get good grades and do all those things. And so I did all of that stuff. But as far as what a path forward looked like, um, just really had no idea what the possibilities were like or what was out there.
I love it. I love it. So you mentioned you actually got married while you were still in college.
Mhm.
Um, what was that like? I mean, you guys still have, you know, this this path you're on in higher education and, decide to tie the knot. I mean, certainly not something you hear a whole lot of is, couples getting married while they're still in school and navigating what they're going through there and then all the steps, beyond. So what challenges did that bring?
So the funny part is I wasn't going to get married till I was in my 30s for sure. Because I mean, I love sports, I love people, I love hanging out, but like had this view of, being in a relationship as whether it's tied down or whatever the view was at the time. And then I met Calissa, and she is not here, so she has no idea. But she was the coolest person that I had met ever, and just really loved hanging out with her. And so like it just naturally progressed really, really quickly. And I mean, it's funny because I think back at like those times and when we would go visit my family in Washington from North Dakota, her and I would take the train. So we would go on a 24-hour train ride, the two of us, and you get to know somebody really, really well,
Yeah.
uh, 24 hours on a train. And so it naturally evolved into wanting to get married and do those things. And, I think the challenges, obviously there's financial challenges and there's some of the different things that come at during that age period. But I think really what it did for us was solidified our commitment to I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. In fact, March were our months where if anything could go wrong financially, a car would break down. We would need new tires. Um, Taxes were coming up or whatever. It kind of solidified whatever it is, let's go through and do it together and figure it out.
I love it.
And I think those things have kind of, as we've moved around the country and had different experiences with those things, it really the foundation it built for us was one that's no matter what the challenge is, let's do it because there's
Yeah,
nobody I'd rather do it with than you. So.
I love that. Well, I think just the fact that, she was willing to fly across the country to spend a couple weeks with you or a week. Again, I don't remember the exact time frame she was out there, which was actually relatively early in your relationship, but yet she was okay with, you know, making that that trick and hanging out with a bunch of ball players
Do you know that was
yourself.
her first flight ever?
I think you did tell me that when we had dinner.
Yeah, so that was her first flight. She flew into Philadelphia, and yeah, hung out with the guys. I mean, the nice part is I lived in a baseball house with five other guys. So by that time she was pretty accustomed to that. And what's funny is when I was actually out playing baseball in Pennsylvania, so she was working or taking classes at the university at that time, and there wasn't any summer classes, so she didn't have a place to stay because she was living in the dorms at the time. And so she ended up staying in my room. So I went to Pennsylvania to play baseball. She ended up moving in, so she was paying the rent for what my room was there, living in a house of five guys. And I'll tell you what, I came back and it was like everybody was domesticated. Like the house smelled good, everything was tidy, and I was looking at my buddy ball players, and I'm like, wow. Like you clean up nicely.
Oh man, well, kudos to her
Yeah.
for doing that. That's pretty amazing for sure. Um, let's shift gears a little bit here.
Mhm.
You know, you're also an author,
Mhm.
like myself. Tell me what started your journey there. Was it a long desire to become published, or where did that come from, and how are you liking it?
So uh, going back, so like I said, as I was a first generation college student, and so all of those things were really, really new to me. And I remember I had a paper due in one of the classes, and um, so I went to meet with the professor and get some feedback on it. And the feedback was not great. It was kind of one of those things like this is terrible, if you will. So it was one of those times that really motivated me to try to learn and improve. And so I used what was a not good feeling moment to kind of motivate me and develop it in those ways. And so I think as I continued to progress, I had some pretty influential advisors, scholars in our programs who were doing a lot of research and work at that time. And so it just really intrigued me. So started working really hard on those skills and meeting with them and did a lot more reading, in the profession, which helped build writing skills as well. And so that naturally evolved and ended up, I remember the first time I had a publication with my name on it, felt really, really cool. And so it was primarily in like doing research types of things. And then that evolved to writing a book with a couple co-authors of mine. And so, yeah, I mean, I think just the ability to share information that you have, to try to put it together, to synthesize, to make it relevant to the audience, is a really cool journey and path to go through. So I kind of have the itch now and have my second book coming out in March or April. But yeah, just really enjoy sharing those thoughts. And writing's one of those things, as you know, right? It's tedious. Um, it's trying to find the motivation. It's the going against roadblocks or writing blocks, as people like to say, and then really pushing yourself to overcome some of those challenges. So, I mean, related to a lot of the things that we're talking about, it teaches you a little bit about adversity. It teaches you about perseverance, teaches you a lot about yourself along the
Yeah,
way.
yeah. This next book that's coming out, is it co-authored as well, or is it just you this time?
Yeah, it's another co-authored book that I have. I have a group of researchers throughout the country that I'd like to meet with regularly and work on different projects with. I think it's one of those things that related to the baseball piece is the team aspect that goes into co-authorship. It teaches you a lot about working with others and everybody having different priorities, timelines, challenges, all of those things. And so I think, as I've done the co-authored work, it's at those times, whether if I'm not on meeting or on a deadline or one of my co-authors isn't on a deadline, it's taking those opportunities to pause the professional piece and lean into the personal piece and having conversations about life and how things are going and what challenges are we're all experiencing. So,
Yeah, I love it. And any plans in the future to potentially do one, just you?
I've thought about that. I would say likely it'll probably end up happening. Um, I think it's I've had the feeling, I have the professional side of things. I've had the athletic side of things. I have right now kind of the family aspect of things. I'm doing a lot of things in leadership and I'm thinking about or wondering like how do all of these things come together and what are some things that might be helpful to share, of lessons or things that I've learned throughout all those various aspects. Because I mean, I think, to your point of when you look at baseball and you look at life, there's common themes or threads that can kind of be interwoven through a lot of the things that we do.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And um, with that, I'm going to shift one more time here to talk about your music. Couple years ago, you decided to take up guitar, and now all of a sudden you're in a band playing small gigs and building a set list. Tell me a little bit about, where that came from. I mean, what role did music play in your life before you started playing, and then what made you, want to go from, you know, the novice listener to, a musician?
So that journey, music was not a part of my life. But I remember when I was a kid, I watched Wayne's World. And so that was my first time I remember actually like seeing an electric guitar. And I was like, that is really, really cool. And sounds great. And so, at the time, like our family didn't have a ton of money or any of those things. And so the electric guitar was probably out of the question, whether it was buying an electric guitar or playing for lessons to figure out how to play it. Well, fast forward a number of years later, I was hanging out, and where we live, we have a cul-de-sac, and we're pretty tight knit up there with all of our neighbors. And one of my neighbors mentioned something about we should start a garage band. And so I was like, oh, that sounds fun. And he was like, do you want to go to the Guitar Center and just look at guitars? And I said, okay. And so I remember we ended up going to the Guitar Center and I called my wife. And the first thing she says, she's like, you bought a guitar, didn't you? And I was like, no, but I have one picked out and I'm at the checkout stand. And she was like, I think that'd be great. So ended up bought a very beginner guitar and started playing a little bit and started taking lessons. And then through that, my neighbor, he took lessons with me and through the person we were taking lessons with ended up meeting a bass guitarist and slowly we all started talking about like it'd be cool to put together a band and so we ended up putting together a band and we've had a few gigs and my wife sings in it, my neighbor plays guitar, I play guitar, and we got a bassist and a drummer, and so we get together once a week or every other week and we work on it. But it's the camaraderie, it's the being there with people and hanging out that I think is the enjoyable part. And the playing the music's pretty cool, but it's more so like sharing those experiences together that's pretty rad. And my kids end up loving it. We played a Green Day song at our first gig, and then my oldest, she wanted to go to the Green Day concert in Seattle. So for her birthday, her and I ended up flying over to Seattle and she got to go see her first concert. So it's funny how it's kind of evolved.
That's cool. That's cool. I love the fact that it really has turned into another team for you, and you talk about the camaraderie and just, sharing that more so than anything else. I mean, the first gig that you guys played, what were some of the feelings leading up to it? And then once you actually got on stage and started playing and seeing the reaction from the crowd, how did you ease into it from there?
I was so nervous, and I do a lot of the lead guitar stuff, so I'm trying to do the solos and all of those things. And my hands were shaking when I was up there, and it was one of the scariest things ever. I tried to think back to like my baseball days and stuff like that, but I felt like I was decent at baseball. At that time, I didn't feel like I was decent at guitar. So it was kind of just have no option. We're going forward with it. And then, really interacting with your bandmates on stage. And the reality is like when you're playing the songs, if the crowd knows what it is, they're singing along. So they often don't pick up on a bunch of the little mistakes that you make throughout it. And it's really more about just the experience of being there and doing the live music together that kind of brings everybody together. So I have got a lot better since that period of time. And I find that every time I play now in front of people, I get a little bit more comfortable. So,
Yeah. Do you feed off the energy you get from the crowd?
oh yeah. And I think that's the piece too, is we've went and seen other people play in, um, I liken it a lot to it's what you want the experience to be. So part of it is, grab the guitar and if there's a part, go out in the crowd and play in the crowd, and interact with people. And I think that just makes it a lot more enjoyable for people. Whereas I think if you're just sitting there trying to play and make sure you hit all the right chords, yes, you might do that, but that doesn't mean the experience that those in the audience have is as enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Joe, we've talked about a lot of different things. I'm sure we could go on and on, but we do have to wrap things up here. But before we go, is there anything we missed that you think would be important to the listeners before we start to wrap things up?
I mean, I think one of the things that I would like to say is I'm sure you remember it, but when when I went out to Pennsylvania, and so I was dating Calissa for like 8 months at that time. And I remember when I went out there, I didn't have a cell phone. And I remember coming, I think having a conversation obviously felt comfortable enough with you, asking if you would be willing to go to the mall with me and help me get a cell phone. And you did graciously and all of those things. And I look back at that time and I look back at where I was relationship wise and having that accessibility to Calissa after 8 o'clock because that's when roaming uh, at that time stopped. But your graciousness and willingness to do it's something that I appreciate. I've appreciated for a long period of time, and I just wanted to make sure I tell you thank you again for doing that for me. It was really
No,
important.
not a problem at all. And again, I think it's those little things in life where, somebody not necessarily listening to the listening to the conversation may see like, oh, you just took him you know, to the phone store to get a phone. One of my other players years ago wasn't something I did for him, but one of our other coaches took him to the eye doctor and got him glasses. And that was again something that 30 years after that had happened, he was like, "Man, Dell did that for me." And I'm thinking to myself, who does that? Who does that for somebody? So you never know what those little things will have an effect on someone else's life. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. Um, is there if anybody's in the Spokane area and wants to listen to the band,
Mhm.
What is we didn't say what is the name of the band, and then also what's the name of the upcoming book in case anybody wants to track that down after they listen to the show.
So the band is Close Enough, which organically came from one of our practices when we were playing a song and then we were reflecting on it and said, "How'd that sound?" And someone said, "Well, it's close enough." Um, and so we went with that. We're working with a couple different venues to see where the next gig's going to be. We're hoping in March. And we do have a Facebook page and we do have an Instagram. So you'll be able to see some clips. We like to take videos when we're practicing and do those things, but all the information will be posted there. But yeah, we're shooting for March.
Cool, cool. And what's the name of the newest book?
The newest book is Essentials of Assessing Infants, Toddlers, and Preschoolers. So it's going to be published by Wiley, and it's more so a guide for clinicians, practitioners, those working with kids 0 to 5 on things that are important for the assessment and evaluation of kids.
Cool, cool. So, Joe, that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of the Michael Franti song Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things, and the whole world changes. So, it's one of the little things that Joe does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
One of the things that I think I try to do on a daily basis is be a good host for others. I think it's not uncommon at our house that we have people over a lot of time. We do a lot of meals, all of those things. So I always try to open our doors for others. So I think it's the little things we try to do is use the gifts and the blessings that we've had, and be able to share those with other people, and then use those times to really connect. So it's in all different aspects of my life. I think people would say is like, I'm not a person that's easy to go have a 5 minute conversation with because I'll want to chat with you for quite a while, as you probably saw during dinner and even here, as we could spend the whole time chatting. But yeah, just really open our house up, use the gifts that we've received, and try to help other people out.
I love that. I love that. That's a great little thing to do for people for sure. So, Joe, I really appreciate you taking the time here. It was a great conversation. Like you said, we probably could have gone on and on, but I didn't want to turn it into a 3 hour Joe Rogan type podcast. That's not my platform at this point. But this is a great conversation. For those out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, check out our Pay It Forward program where you can buy a copy of one of my books, and Sandy and I will donate it to a little library or somebody along the way in our travels. And it's just a great way to, just like the program says, pay it forward. So once again, Joe, I appreciate this. It's a great conversation. I wish you nothing but the best moving forward, and definitely looking forward to the next time we can get out there to Spokane and hang out with you a little bit more.
That's good. Appreciate it, Dan.
You bet.